The way it worked in those days, the Labour Party dominated things. There was 79 councillors in Glasgow and Labour had 74. So if you wanted to be leader, you had to be the chosen person of that 74. I had harboured the ambition to be leader of the council. The longer I was a councillor, the more I was of the view that party politics was a lot less important at council level than it is at other levels of government, because the majority of councillors put the interest of the city first. And I wanted that job to be able to change things. I could see things I wanted to do for Glasgow and wanted to do for the communities I felt really close to in my heart. And eventually, unanimously, the 74 Labour councillors chose me to take over in what was described by the media as a velvet revolution. Don't really know why. I think it was because people were made to sit up and eyebrows raised at something 32, unseating all these, as I did, long established big grey-haired Labour figures at the time. I knew I wanted the job and I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do things differently.
Hello, Steven Purcell, welcome along, Caley Corner. I really appreciate you coming in and doing this.
Oh, delighted. It's, apart from, I don't mind talking, love talking. In fact, it's always nice to meet new people, get new experience. And, you know, the thing about Glasgow is I nearly said it's a wee village. It's not. Scotland's a bit of a village. Glasgow's a wee bit of a hamlet. And we kind of all live on top of each other. But it doesn't mean you know everybody, so I just like opportunities of meeting people. So I'm delighted. Thank you.
No worries. Is that what got you into politics then? Because I think obviously people who live in Glasgow will be familiar with your name, familiar with some of your stories. So I think you joined the Labour Party at 14, I was sort of reading. So what, can you maybe just talk, we'll just start there actually, maybe if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. So I don't know why, I just had a brain and an interest and a bit of emotion around politics that I learned that, you know, it came out when I was at school. I just don't come from a political family. A lot of people end up in politics is because there's a tradition of politics in their family. My family had strong views, but nobody was active in politics. And when I was at school, I just got more and more interested, got involved in what was known as the Justice and Peace Group when I was at secondary school. And it focused very much with the chaplain that led it, and around a lot of social issues and a lot of international issues as well that were very prevalent at the time in the 1980s. So social issues being the whole changing nature of where people lived because of the changing nature of industry, and the then Thatcher Tory government who reconstructed the whole economy and sort of brought lots of our traditional heavy industry to an end, and that led to all sorts of social issues, mainly about, you know, where people lived, because people lived where employment was traditionally in this country, and that was the kind of issues that we were exploring at school in the Justice and Peace Group, as well as other issues like the then not long deployed nuclear weapons in the Clyde, and issues of human rights issues in Central and Southern America, where there was a lot going on at the time, and these were all kind of waiting in my brain, and I got really interested in politics. And in those days, it's different now. You know, if you're in the west of Scotland, you kind of, if you were interested in the social side of politics, you didn't really think there was any other debate except being a Labour, because everybody was. And obviously the political landscape has changed dramatically, not just in the west of Scotland, but across the world in terms of politics. Well, you know, we continue to evolve as a human race, and we evolve politically as well. So it was that awakening at school when I just naturally considered myself a Labour person, joined the Labour Party, and it became a big part of my life for a long time.
I guess, is it your career, Faye?
Yep, that's right.
So, like, I don't know what the history is, so you'll need to educate me and maybe some of the listeners here. So obviously you've heard, like, back in the day when they started ripping down the sort of tenements and they were building, you know, they were putting people out to Drumchapel and Easterhouse and then people down to Irvine and all the rest of it. Like, is that the kind of timeline that we're talking about? Or were you coming in after that?
After that, so all of these big housing schemes were established, and Yoker's a kind of small, a much smaller neighbourhood in Glasgow, and it's kind of a mix of streets that were effectively housing estate, council housing estate areas with some private housing, and it was all centred around the banks of the Clyde, so lots of people living there were employed in the shipyards, but it wasn't a big housing scheme in the sense of when people were getting cleared out of the slums into the new housing schemes like Drumchapel and Pollock and Easthouse, or the new towns that you were mentioning that then grew in Irvine and East Kilbride and all these places that really a lot of skilled workers went out to. But York was more of a traditional Clydeside village historically that turned into an area that housed lots of people, mainly because they worked in shipbuilding. Therefore, the point I was making earlier about industry and the Labour Party and all of these things being kind of all mixed in together during those years.
So what kind of stuff would it have been that you'd have been focusing on then, like as a young, what were you kind of getting exposed to, like at that age that you were kind of getting your teeth into?
So it was just, it was the whole change to heavy industry during the years in the 80s where, you know, whether it was shipbuilding or the steel industry or coal mines, the car industry, all sorts of things that were being shut down, were being rooted out of communities as the then government were changing the nature of the economy to a much more financial service-led economy. And I think the anger in communities like the one that I grew up in was partly the loss of what they knew as their way of life, the loss of employment, but it was also not understanding what the government thought the consequences would be if you just rip employment right out of the heart of communities without a plan B. You know, so nowadays, if you think about one of the big debates that we're facing as a human race in this country as well is about climate change and net zero. But there's not a politician doesn't talk about the importance of transition. So if you're going to change from these traditional industries that are affecting our climate and the like, there's got to be a transition. There's got to be a period in which people can change the employment they're in, etc. That was not the case in the 1980s, and you just kind of almost quiet, very painful revolution going on in communities, the working class communities up and down the length and breadth of the UK, not just here in the west of Scotland. And that was the kind of thing that was making people angry and politicising so many people of my generation. And I was one of them, and then you begin to realise the effect it was having on all sorts of things. It was affecting how people felt about themselves, people's mental health, how they felt about the community they lived in. If they had less money, you know, it had an effect on the economy, and turn it had an effect on housing. You know, so all of the changes that is happening in places like Glasgow, where you were talking about earlier, these slums were pulled down and people put into new housing, then all the effects of ripping out in the industry and way of life or where people were working started to knock on effects to so many other things like housing. So lots of the problems we are facing today and that governments are trying to face up to, our societies trying to face up, actually have a root of their origins and the problem been back in the 80s, and that's that kind of stuff that made me active in politics and made me a quietly determined, angry young man at what I was seeing and what I felt was a terrible injustice.
So what would that have, like, how would that have manifested itself? What was that, you getting involved with sort of organisations and demos and joining picket lines and all that sort of stuff?
That's right. So that period of growing up as a teenager in the 1980s, and if you were political or even people who weren't hugely political, but the level of anger that there was around at that time it was a real period of lots of demonstrations and, as you said, strikes and picket lines and organising events to fundraise to support people that either lost their work or were striking to protect their work. There was a demonstration of some sort every week in Glasgow, and you know, so you felt part of something. So there was a kind of strength in it as well. You really felt part of something, and I suppose if your politics are on the centre left, and you believe in that kind of level of, if you actually believe in the collective, if you believe in community, you don't believe it's about the individual in a way and make your own way in life, if you believe in all of that, then actually in all that protest and campaigning to have a different kind of society or protect the way that people had and protect people's employment, it really underlined to you what you believed in, which was the strength of community, of endeavour together, of inclusive stuff, and not that kind of centre-right argument, in particular of Margaret Thatcher during those days about the freedom of the individual, and the individual will always triumph, and her exact words, there is no such thing as society. Well, you know, even being involved in these demos and all of that activity, it sort of taught you the opposite. Then, the other great thing about all of that, I don't know if you just look back, you get to the age when you're in your 50s and you just kind of turn into your dad and the like, and you look back, and I don't know if it's just through kind of rose-tinted glasses, starry eyes, but everyone felt quite political and you felt part of something. The whole music scene in the 80s, there was so much, like the Specials and Ghost Town and all these things, and protest music, and Billy Bragg was a wee bit more sane than some people think he is now. All of that was going on at the time as well, and
well, you have to get people to and from these demos, so it's probably a bit of crack on the bus and that.
Well, I'm sure there was more than that, and there was all sorts going on, but that's human life as well, and that's just people, isn't it? So I look back and I don't, like every human being having ups and downs in life, but I look back through all of my life now. You get an age where you start to become more reflective in life. I look back and I just think, even in those horrible, tough times that it was for so many people, I personally have lived through some great things and great experiences and met great people all along the way. I consider myself a really privileged person in life and a really lucky person in life as well. Sometimes it's just been the right place at the right time.
I know, that's interesting. We'll touch on that then. So, how old were you when you first decided you were going to stand for election, in the council elections? Did you get elected straight away, or was there any adversity?
I did get elected straight away, although I had decided before I was legally entitled to stand for election that I would have a go, and only to be told that I had to come back. I was too young, because in those days you had to be 21, although you could vote at 18, you had to be 21 to stand for election. And I stood when I was 22 in 1994, and I did get elected right away, because again it was in a time that Labour would be almost guaranteed to win almost anywhere in the west of Scotland. And then I went on to spend 17 years as an elected member at Glasgow City Council, and again, great experiences and great times. A great time ultimately to be involved in the city, because we went through a great period of change. I think the city incidentally is in another cusp of another exciting time of great change, and it will begin to work its way through. So
what can you remember? Is there any specific that you can think about at that time that was kind of transformative?
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I think given where the industry I'm working in now, a big transformative thing was the change that began in the mid-late 90s around housing in the city. It was time the housing stock in the city, this public sector social housing stock, had been starved of investment for 30 years. We're not good in this country at in all aspects of the public sector, or things like actually just properly maintaining things. And then we end up costing ourselves 10, 20, 30 years down the road, huge bills, because we haven't looked after things along the way. So that period, late 90s, when I was first a councillor, there was big opportunity to start investing in people's houses, and that was things like just giving people double glazing, putting central heating in. Most council house stock, and if you represented most Labour areas in the city of Glasgow, you were still in those days representing big areas that had a large percentage of social housing stock. Most of them didn't have central heating. These are things that I suspect most people take for granted now, as double glazing and central heating. But actually, when I was first elected, which in my world doesn't seem that long ago, to MD younger than me, certainly people under the 40, I think we probably think MD over 50 is pretty ancient, but when I was in my 20s, that was the truth. So anyway, I was able to get involved with local residents groups and tenants groups, and we were going campaign to get our share of some investment in our areas, and it was good, and I met great people along the way. I learned then, I'll tell you what stood out about that. I'll tell you what I stood out as a councillor and a young man in my 20s was getting involved in these communities that I kind of thought I knew because I came from York and it was a bit of a working class community. I actually get involved in communities with big social housing areas. The backbone of these communities were often women. Women, like they're often the backbone of a house and a family in many ways, aren't they? I don't mean that because men don't play the role, but it was Oscar Wilde that said that the female are the more deadly of the species. Well, I don't know if that's true, but they're certainly, I think, in some ways, more stronger and certainly in these communities that I was representing and getting involved in, there were some very strong-willed women. I was kind of frightened of them, actually, in a sense. They were standing up shouting ball at public meetings. I was sitting there as a wee 20-something councillor, and they were pointing their finger at me. And then as the time went on, I realised, actually, these people were fighting for what they were entitled to, and they were right to do it, and they were right to give people like me a hard time because they'd voted me in, and then I'm there to serve them. That's your bottom line. And some of these women that was shouting ball at meetings that I was frightened of, I then began to learn they were actually my biggest supporters, because all you have to do was your job. Nothing actually to do with party politics, just do your job. And it was good, big learning experience, but it was good fun along the way as well. And the highlight was just seeing things change for people. Being able to help affect the conditions in which people live. Think about it, and lots of people still don't live in great housing conditions. Time moves on and somehow lots of things don't move on. But for lots of us in life, lots of us live maybe not wonderfully high, wealthy lives like all these people we see on television or Instagram. They're these great influencers, but most of us live in a reasonable home. Watertight, and in those days lots and lots of people didn't, so we have had progress, and to see and feel that you were a wee part of that along the way, that's what stands out for me.
What about you mentioned sort of social housing, the maintenance? We used building a lot of houses back then. Like, is there challenges with building houses? Maybe we talk about some of that, like your experience and like being in the council for so long.
So we weren't building houses in those days because there was a policy brought in the 1980s that allowed council houses to be sold off to people that were tenants of a certain period, and they were able to buy them, and the councils were banned from by the government using that money to build other homes. You had to put it towards debt, and therefore, there was very little new housing getting built by many councils across the country. But then when that government changed and the last Labour government came in 1997, they changed a lot of these regulations. They also encouraged, for example, in Glasgow, the council to transfer all its stock to a housing association, the Glasgow Housing Association, the Wheatley Group, who then did start building and still are, lots of new housing. And although we weren't directly doing it as a council, as local councillors, we were involved in that. And the challenges that were faced then are not dissimilar to the challenges now, which is, if you suddenly put a lot of money into doing something and you don't have enough workers or materials, then you can't go as fast as you want. And also, I think sometimes that what the public sector gets wrong, and well-meaning public sector people, housing associations, politicians, is sometimes you forget to stop and ask the people that are going to live in them, what do they want? You're so much in a hurry to do things and throw up houses, and how often is that been the mistake in places like Glasgow in the west of Scotland? You get these housing estates that people actually want to live in, because what have you done? You've designed them for the purpose of housing people without actually asking them what they want.
Aye, because they're trying to fit as much stock onto a space as possible, so they're not interested in parks and shops and all that sort of stuff and sort of communal areas, are they? Unfortunately, it's just a lot of this is about the profit. Which is why I was asking about the sort of council numbers, because I don't know what ability the current council administrations have got to really say, right, we'll build 100 houses, 150 social houses without getting sort of private.
It's very hard if you don't bring private sector involvement now, either to be party to the building or to build some private stock for profit at the same time. What councils are better at now, and this is part of the legislation that's come in through the Scottish Parliament, having a Scottish Parliament, is there's much more obligation on councils through the planning process to insist that when anyone's doing a new development, private or public sector housing, that actually there is a decent amount of amenity space and green space and open space and all of these things designed in before people get planning permission. Now, lots of developers and others don't like that because it is encroaching on their ability to build more and get more profit. But so I think, whilst there's a lot of issues are the same as they were when I was first involved in politics, I as an activist or a politician, a lot of things have advanced and are better, and that's one of them, is that it's harder now to build any kind of new development and not provide the right kind of amenity space or park space, and particularly when it's flatted developments. Councils are very much tougher now about saying people that live in flats have got to have decent space. You know, might not have their own gardens, but they've got to have decent space, you know, that's convenient for them. And a lot of housing developments, even one that I remember not long ago going through the planning committee for a housing association just in the south side of Glasgow, where the council were insisting they put in roof gardens for the people that live in them, so that people in council social housing stock and they get the same kind of things that private sector flat developments now often get. So a lot of things that councils are better at insisting on doing, even if they're not having to do it themselves, but they're getting developers to do it.
No, quite right. I think we've obviously seen through the isolation of COVID that people that were in flats were more adversely affected, right, because they didn't have the option of going out into a garden and getting that sort of respite.
Absolutely. And look, we hopefully have learned from the pandemic. Hopefully our government agencies and governments have learned. But look, because of things like climate change, because of the amount of travelling that this growing world population, I mean, as unpopular as it might be to say, there's an awful lot of too many people in many ways living in this planet now for what the planet can cope with, without a different kind of way of living. And the amount of travelling, the amount of people travelling and all the rest of it, then the chances are we will get another pandemic. You know, climate change, all of these things are contributing, and therefore, hopefully, things like learning that you have to plan that people, even if they're just planning because there might be another pandemic, it's the right thing to do, because why shouldn't people who live in a flat for whatever reason, either through no choice or because they've made a choice to do that, not have the same kind of things that many of the rest of us have, like a nice garden or space to be able to go and relax in, do your mental health good, get nice fresh air, all of the benefits of being around greenery and nature, and particularly if we're ever, God forbid, locked down again.
Aye, it just seems like a basic human right, access to green space and your own kind of private outdoor space.
Because it's natural. We're human beings. We're born into a planet that's actually based on things like water and green space. We invent these concrete jungles. We invent a way of living that's actually not natural. So they are human rights.
Aye, no, we'll agree on that. I'm interested in your sort of journey to becoming like the leader of the council there, because I think that would be interesting for people to sort of know about, Stephen. So you were elected when you were like 22, and then I think you were a councillor for about 10 years, and then you were elected as the leader of the largest council administration in the country. So how did that kind of come to pass? Did you have to fight an election? Were you up against like some competition, or was it?
So the way it worked in those days is again a wee bit different, because we've got multi-party politics, but the Labour Party dominated things. There were 79 councillors in Glasgow and Labour had 74. So if you wanted to be leader, you had to be the chosen person of that 74. And I had harboured the ambition to be leader of the council, and less so leader of the Labour group. The longer I was a councillor, the more I was of the view that party politics was a lot less important at council level than it is at other levels of government, because the majority of councillors and the majority of people just want, I think anyway, those that are their councillors just to put the interests of the city first, and to put the interests of, if you represented an area like I did with lots of social and council house, and you want, or whatever the issues, then became schools, it was important to people's housing got better. And I wanted that job to be able to change things. I could see things I wanted to do for Glasgow and wanted to do for the communities that I felt really close to in my heart. But you had to win that election inside the Labour group, and my predecessor was becoming increasingly unpopular with his colleagues and distant from his colleagues. So I saw my opportunity, and I started setting my stall out, and eventually, unanimously, the 74 Labour councillors chose me to take over. And what was described in the media as a velvet revolution. Don't really know why. I think it's because people were made to sit up and eyebrows raised at somebody at 32, unseating all these sort of, as I did, long established big grey-haired Labour figures at the time, and just sweeping them aside. I would never sweep them aside, but in my world I was sweeping them aside anyway, and taking over, and that was what happened. But I was very clear about what I wanted to do when I went into the job. I had that clear in my head. I knew I wanted the job, and I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do things differently.
And when you were in charge of the council, like what would have been like your budget? Like how many people would have been working under you?
So it was 38,000 staff, budget of £2.4 billion. So it's a big organisation. It still is. It's not as big as it was for different reasons now, but big organisation, big powerful organisation. But it's like a great big ship in the ocean, it doesn't. These things don't move as fast as you think. They don't turn very easily either. So
there's a few icebergs, I know, probably, is there?
There are definitely a few icebergs, and the icebergs weren't that far from underneath or very far from your office. So I mean, all these ideas about what I could do and what I couldn't do, and then I get to realise actually it takes a bit more considered and careful management to change things, and it would be slow. But look, the economy was good. There was a lot of confidence around the city, and that will help to try and do some of the things I wanted to do, because we could, and there was good people about, not just in the council but elsewhere, and for me personally, it was a great opportunity, but a great learning experience. I'd never been to university. I left school at 16. So becoming a councillor at a young age I did, and for all these grey-haired old established Labour figures I was talking about, the truth was I learned a lot from them. I mean, I was maybe less arrogant than maybe I am now. I don't know, maybe you get older and you become you're less able to learn because you think you've seen it all or whatever. I don't know. In those days I was young and hungry and I wanted to learn, so I learned a lot from people, and I learned a lot in the job. I learned a lot about myself as well. It's part of my growing up, even though I was in my 30s.
I know, when I was researching you a bit, it seems like you were a bit like a workaholic back then. It's kind of what some of the articles were sort of implying. Is that sort of fair to say, that you were like first in, last out type of thing?
Yeah, that's my nature. I'm addicted to more. So I'm an addict in life about anything. Anything I do, I don't do by half measures, and that includes work. I'm like that now. Maybe a wee bit better work-life balance, but I like more over. And if I'm enjoying what I do, I want lots of it. And I was like that, and I loved being a councillor, and I love being council leader. So,
like, what was the most enjoyable parts about it? Like, was there a project or something you had in mind when you went in and you thought, I really want to do this, and you were sort of able to see it through?
Yeah, I mean, there was two things, and it go back to what I was talking about earlier about being grown up in the 1980s and just seeing this destruction of communities going on, and the lack of just hope being ripped out of people's communities, people's hearts, and opportunities for young people to get on and just do what they wanted to do in life, to get out and be productive. And the thing I was really determined to do, because it become so fashionable, and I don't knock this is a really important part. We're in a university just now. It's a really important part of life as people get into university, but it's not the only thing that people can do. So I was really determined to try and ramp up the apprenticeship opportunities in the city. And also, to be clear, the apprenticeships are not, as they traditionally been thought of, solely about construction trades and the like. Apprenticeships are about giving people an opportunity to get skills in a whole range of industries, because construction's a big industry, of course it is, but also as IT and financial services and hospitality. And I was determined that we could, and we did. I mean, I think the proudest thing I was able to steer through and announce and commit and deliver on was the year that we were able to guarantee every single school leaver in the city, which was the year 2008, I think, an apprenticeship. We guaranteed that everyone that wanted an apprenticeship would get one, and they did. And that programme carried on for a number of years. I can't remember if everybody got what could guarantee, but there was a year that we were able to, because of the relationship we had, the funding we had, the relationship we had with other employers in the private sector as well, that we could do that. And that for me was a real, I felt that I personally had delivered something that countered that anger I had as a teenager. Not because of what happened to me. I was lucky enough to find work when I was 16, but in the communities that in Glasgow and elsewhere, that you could see that people weren't getting. Because you talk right about housing and space and all this thing, a human right. I think because of the way we organise society, it should be a human right to be able to work as well. And that's got to start when people are ready, when they leave school or leave university or college.
Aye, no, it's an anxious time in your life as well, when you're that kind of age, Like
to make you or break you?
Potentially, aye. It's definitely scary because, even people's home lives, you know, their parents are maybe putting pressure on them, you know, you're starting to become like I'm trying to find the right word here, but like the cost of keeping you, you know, is becoming a bit of a burden, you know, it's becoming a challenge because they're, you know, maybe struggling economically as well. So that
And
puts
you're not a
up,
child anymore.
aye,
You know, and sometimes it's hard love to help you learn that.
it's difficult to navigate that though as a young adult, you know, because in your head you're probably thinking, fuck, I don't really know what I want to do, you know, I'm not sure where my skills are, or, you know, what's going to be the right decision for me. So there's a lot of anxiety there. So I think at least having the option of, I could maybe do this for a year or two would be reasonable.
And see if it works.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was thinking about, I should maybe know his dad actually. When I was at uni here, there was a guy, Chris Ryan, and he came here, and I forget what his dad was, but it was obviously Councillor Ryan or whatever, and for East End, and he came here and we studied sort of computing, but you can tell he just wasn't into it at all. You know, he just did it for like a year, and then he came back and he did like quantity surveying, and like it's good. I think it's difficult as a working class person to always have that freedom to kind of chop and change. I never felt as though I had that kind of luxury myself, but if you've got like this scheme, you know, guaranteeing apprenticeships, and it does give you a wee bit of flexibility and freedom there, to be fair.
As well, it's funny you mentioned Chris Ryan. Back to, we live in a bit of a village in a hamlet, so his dad, George Ryan, got elected at the same time as me, and George was my campaign manager to be leader. So, you know, this is a wee village, and Chris, incidentally, who I kind of still keep in touch with, has went on to do really well in life too, and is a young father now, and a lovely family. And look, that's what life should be about. Life should be about seeing the generation that are coming behind us in our own family or in the communities in which we live in, the city in which we live in, being able to make their own way in life with their own choices, but part of something, part of a community, and that's where there is, I just think there's a social responsibility on us as human beings, to help each other and to look after each other. And I think it's one of the good things about Glasgow. I think Glasgow's a kind of city like that. You know, it's a city that's had its rough and tumbles over the years. A city that punches above its weight. It's a city that these people are a bit callous. I like that. I like that, you know. And I think I think Glasgow's quietly a very understanding city. So it's this no mean city image, and it can be a tough city. A lot of tough people about it, but actually it's here. I think Glasgow's a very understanding city, and the way I sum that up is, I think the greatest thing about Glasgow is you don't have to come from Glasgow to be a Glaswegian, and I think people who move here for whatever reason, whether that's asylum seekers, refugees, whether it's people coming from, you know, they traditionally came from Ireland or up in the Highlands that moved here, or people that come from England. Now, lots of people come from England to study here or to work in the new financial services industries. I think most people that come here suddenly consider themselves a Glaswegian.
I always say to people, because I commute through Edinburgh, like Edinburgh's got the nicer architecture and the buildings and all that, but there's a spirit in Glasgow that is unmatched, really. That Liverpool's the only other place that I've ever been to that kind of comes close to it. And I mean, even go everywhere internationally. I've been a lot of places with Celtic. You meet a lot of nice people in Milan, you know, Turin, wherever else there is other countries apart from Italy, but Glasgow is it's unique, and like you say, there is that kind of toughness, but the undercurrent in that is that there's a protection there as well. Like people care about each other, and there is I think that there's definitely a unity as well. You know, there's something special in Glasgow. There's a reason why it's the most populated sort of place in Scotland, and why it does as well as it does.
It's becoming a younger city as well, which is terrific. I can't remember if it's because there's the latest census is out, or if it's another report, but the council quoted quite a bit now year in and out, seeing them about Glasgow having the highest, or amongst the highest in the whole of the UK, 24 to 45, I think, age group now. And I think that's partly because we saw a lot of new jobs in emerging industries like tech and IT and financial services and different things, and and a lot of big companies and employers that have located here have done so because of the quality of what's coming out of our universities. And you probably know this from suspecting you might know this from your experience at university with people you hear. Lots of people come to study in Glasgow and then decide to stay in Glasgow. And you can only do that if you like the city, you feel part of something, and the jobs are there. So, there's a lot of complaining goes on about the state of Glasgow city centre just now, and a whole number of other things which people are right to complain about, but there's an awful lot of things that in the sort of 30 years that I've been a proper adult roundabout working in Glasgow and watching Glasgow, a lot of things much better than it definitely was when I grew up. And I was saying to someone at the council today, and I was in somebody very senior, I've noticed over the years, being someone that's been in and out of the city centre my working life for almost 30 years, just walking around the city centre at lunchtime, this is a younger city. And that can only be a good thing for the city. Because you can't have a city that's based on ageing population and people getting over the other side of 50 thinking about what's left of their life. It's got to be about what's coming through, and that feeds back into what we're talking about the rights for people to, when they're teenagers and try to navigate their way in life, that those of us that can and are a bit older are making sure that that's there for them.
Aye, no, absolutely. You mentioned the sort of like a bit about the community spirit and the sort of togetherness, obviously, Stephen. But towards the end of your time, obviously at Glasgow City Council, you obviously, you don't need to talk about this if you don't want to, no, but obviously you were, you'd sort of said to the rest of the council group, look, you'd been taking drugs, and I think the police had sort of approached you. Is it all right to talk like a bit about that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, by the time I resigned as leader of the council, I had a serious drink problem, and that had led to me experimenting in drugs, cocaine, and somebody had reported the police, and they came in, spoke to me in a friendly way. But the real issue was that I had a serious drink problem at that time, and I knew that I couldn't carry on in the job I was doing. In fact, my life was, I was just in such an emotional state with of what I didn't understand at that time was alcoholism, and thankfully, partly because I did bite the bullet and resign, and it made me start thinking about what I was going to do with my life, and eventually, when I was able to stop drinking, I found a way through that, and became, for me anyway, whether other people think this close to me, I have become a better person for me. I didn't necessarily. Other people think that, but people say, "Oh, it was a hazard of the job. It was a hazard of this." No, I had reasons that I had a drink problem, and what I would say to anyone that and the thing I've learned about facing up to alcoholism is that it's just another form of addiction, and it doesn't matter what you're addicted to. If you have an addiction problem, then you have one thing in common, which, and this is just my view, others will have other views. In my view, you have probably a deep-seated emotional reason for that. Maybe you're born with it. Maybe that was always going to be the case. I don't know. I know enough about all of that side of it. But what I do know is that everybody that's got an addiction issue has something in common, obviously. But the thing that most people have in common is that they're struggling with life for some reason, emotionally. And if there's anybody listening to this that's in that category or thinks they might be, what I would say to them is, I am the most disciplined person and the most undisciplined, because I'm not disciplined about things when I want them in life. Because I was being serious when I said I'm addicted to more earlier. If I want 3 cream cakes on that table, eat 3 cream cakes. So when I choose to be disciplined and stop drinking, when I choose not to drink or not eat 3 cream cakes, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But the real key to dealing with addiction, for me, and this is just my experience, is to face up to why you're really doing it. What is it you're running away from? Because in my experience of my own addiction and all of the people I've got to know through recovery in this city, which is a beautiful community as well. I mean, I really, and I use that word carefully, deliberately. It's a beautiful community with some very beautiful people. They're some of the hardest people in the city, but they're actually really beautiful. And many of them helped me through my journey to recovery, which is daily. And it is that when you face, in my experience, most people are running away from something, generally themselves. You may face up to it. As my dad always said, I wish I'd listened to him before my drink problem got out of control. And he never really spoke to me about drinking. Maybe he should have. But what he would always say, he still says about anything in life, there's a solution to everything except death. So if you're not dead, there's a solution.
It seems like good life advice.
Yeah.
Would you, when you were on the job, would you have been allowed to drink on the job? Was that part of the problem?
Well,
like sort of social occasions and lunches and all that sort of stuff.
In that sense, there was a lot of opportunities to drink from. I mean, sometimes in the morning. I mean, royal visits were a great excuse. I remember royalty came, it was quite permissible to pour them a drink.
Let's get the stories out now, Stephen.
My recollection is they probably took one drink and went on with their day, whereas if I took one drink, I was quite happy to then look for who might want a second. And go and do a wee bit of work and then see who might be in the pub at lunchtime. But I mean, in that sense, if you've got a drink problem or just an addictive personality or whatever you want to call it, then being in a job where there's functions and alcohol available during the day at your job, it's definitely not a good. I mean, look, I've got a couple of friends been elected to Parliament recently, and I keep saying them, thankfully I don't have a drink problem, at least that I know of, unless they're doing it in secret. Like when Labour was last in power, I was in Parliament, I mean, it was just a heaven for people who wanted to drink too much, because the bars are open all day and every day, you know. So the council was a wee bit like that, maybe not quite the club that Parliament is, but a definite hazard to enable your desire to drink a lot.
I hope they've maybe changed some of their madmen policies there.
I hope so too.
What about do you think you got enough like support for like the rest of the sort of elected sort of representatives there? Like when you've sort of said to them, you know, I've got this problem and, you know, I'm stressed or whatever, you know, I'm sort of struggling effectively, because it seems like some of them maybe came after you, but I don't know if they were Labour or they were part of other parties. Like, did you get enough support effectively? Or
Well, the ironic thing is that I get more support. This is the nature of politics. This is not me complaining. Your enemies tend to be in your own party, and that's true of every political party. I get more support from people in other parties, you know, and but equally, I didn't let a lot of people in, you know. So you know, that was part of my journey as well, that I made those choices too. No, politics, for anybody in politics, is not a business to look for support from other people. And I'm not complaining about that, because that's the business I was in. Indeed, there'll be people over the years that felt, when I was at the height of my power, that I had an element of ruthlessness as well. So, and that will be true. And another reason why I wouldn't like to get back into politics, because it's a rough and tumble game, and you can do a lot of good, and I don't regret any time I was in it and what I've learned and my achievements in it, what I've learned about myself as a result of it. But I wouldn't like to do the job again.
No, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I think it was like John Mason's name was popping up.
Yeah.
And obviously that's kind of topical now, right, because he's lost the whip. So I was wondering, like, you've obviously been on a bit of a personal journey, right? You've went through AA or whatever it is. Like, would you have any bitterness and ill will towards him for maybe some of the flack that he sort of...
No, I don't really. I mean, there was a period I did, but you know, you get older and you get wiser, and you look back and you look at your own part in things as well, which is really important. That's why I said, you know, I pushed a lot of people away as well. But look, a lot of people took it as an opportunity to make up their own version of events as well. That happens. One thing I have learned is there can be fire, you know, there can be smoke with no fire, that's for sure. So a lot of things said at the time that had a basis of truth, a lot of things that had no basis of truth. And because I had chosen to stay silent after I resigned, there was a vacuum where you weren't responding to things. But to answer your actual question about John or anybody else, no, I absolutely don't. People either chose to believe things that weren't true, chose to believe the worst, or they just saw a political opportunity and thought they could take it. And that's part of the inverted commas sport that's around politics, and I sailed in those waters too, so I'm in no position to then I think be bitter about what other people did. Plus, life is too bloody short.
I see that's what puts people off politics, though. I think like they don't want to fucking sail in those waters. I think they want to think that if they were in that environment and something like that happened, that there would maybe be a bit of, people wouldn't need a pound of flesh. There would be a bit of sympathy and support. I think it's maybe changing a wee bit. I don't think there's less stigma now when people come out and they say, they're struggling with depression, or they're exhausted, need a bit of break. But I think the political arena still is one of the only ones where people really like to put the boot in publicly.
Well, I think there's two arenas that are still a wee bit different, and the other one's probably football as well. So I think football and politics have moved on too, where we can be more open about things, because society has moved on. But there is certain parts of life that's a wee bit different from mainstream employment or other forms of culture and recreational activity or whatever. But I would say that when I look back, or if it's something happened today, and it does, because people, politics for human beings, similar to me, I don't know if MD would just get quite the experience I had, which was probably more painful for my family and for people that cared about me than it was to me at the time, because I was such a bloody emotional state and drinking to block it out that some of it bypassed me. But I think most people would have a better experience. But ultimately, if you're in politics, or you're at the sharp end of your greatest rival in football or something, still be a sharp experience, I think. It's part and parcel of life.
What about it's 10 years since the independence sort of campaign in Scotland, Stephen, so sort of what's your opinion on how that sort of shaped society and sort of politics in Scotland? And
well, look, I personally think that the independence referendum was a good experience in Scotland, and I know lots of people that don't think that's the case, particularly people that feel strongly about remaining part of the union, and they felt it divided people, it divided families, and all of the rest of it. But many ways, politics and big difficult questions in politics should be divisive. The real question is what people do after things that divide us. But if politics and political questions are not dividing people, then what's the point of political questions existing? So if we all agree there's a consensus, then nothing would change. So I think the independence referendum was a good experience because it did ask people to challenge their way of thinking. It did get an awful lot of people engaged in political questions that would never get engaged, never want to be, never be attracted to, or that felt that mainstream politics, including those that were proposing independence, the SNP being the main nationalist party representing them, didn't find mainstream politics attractive. So I think it was a good experience of something that the whole country got engaged in. I don't remember anybody that didn't have a view on it, and still don't. And for me, I think it's always going to be the natural question. Once the process began to devolve power away from Westminster and to give it to parts of the country like Scotland, which is its own country, might choose to be part of a political union, but people that deny that Scotland isn't a country in its own right, with a proud history and maybe a proud future as an independent country, are living in a la-la land, because that's just factually the case. Now, Scotland chose again in 2014 to remain part of a political union, and those of us that didn't make that choice in 2014 have to respect that. Not everybody does. So the negative aspects are people that can't have the maturity to understand that, yes, you've got to respect, you also got to respect the outcomes. I mean, I don't like it myself to get beat, but I can't argue with the fact, right? And I've got to respect, it's a bit like, I didn't like having to resign as council leader, and I like the fact that people, some people put the boot in after it. But ultimately, when I could see a bit clearer in life, I had to realise, look at my part in that as well. And so if people think that wasn't a positive experience in the independence referendum, I'm asked to yourself the question, what was your part of the people that you were supporting, part in how people behaved and reacted afterwards? Just like if your team gets beat in football, the team has to ask itself, what was their part in getting beat? You can't blame the other side. You can't blame the referee.
No,
You
absolutely.
can apportion some debate about people's judgment and their performance and all the rest of it, but actually, ultimately, you've got to look at your own part in things.
Are you talking about like Project Fear, like how negative they were? Are you insinuating that maybe that's why they didn't enjoy it, because of the message they were putting out?
Well, that's right, and I also think that the way some people on what would be called the extremes, the fringes, are those arguing for independence, and the way they treat other people and think folk are traitors because they're arguing to remain in a union, which we are part of. We're voluntarily, nobody's holding a gun to their head to keep us in the union. You know, so whether it's Project Fear or the opposite, on the other side, I would say to people, you have to look at your partner if you want to win an argument long term, because the thing is, it might be off the agenda for the foreseeable future. But 2014 didn't end the argument about whether Scotland should be independent. In my view, it only actually began that debate. And therefore, I would say to people, and I say to lots of my friends in the unionist parties and the Labour Party and others, you know, if you want to ultimately win this argument, you won't do it on the basis of fear. It will eventually be for positive reasons, and it will be because, and I personally am persuadable, you know, to stay in something. I think it's in the right interests of the people I care deeply about, which is, you know, back to what I spoke about earlier about the sense of community and unpopular as it is to talk about these things now. I still believe in the definition of class because I think it exists, and that's why I voted yes to the independence referendum, because for me, I felt it become a class issue, and people from working class background felt that the best hope for people from our class to flourish into the future was an independent Scotland and not in the United Kingdom at that time.
Is that publicly known, like widely publicly known, like that you would have voted yes? Like, were you approached the campaign either on behalf of?
But both sides, yeah, and I chose not to. Either way, and I chose not to tell them how I was voting. As it happened, as time went on, I decided to share it. I shared it in a newspaper the article that I wrote a few months after it, and you know, some people were cynical about why I did that. But the reason, you know, I'd been on the losing side. Like, I kept my mouth shut. I decided not to, because I thought it was important to tell the story, and to do with the background I'd had in the jobs I'd had before. I thought it was important to tell the story of people from a Labour background who had made a journey to vote yes. And I felt that the reaction of many people in the Labour Party after the referendum was they just didn't get it. They couldn't really get their head round that more people who had voted Labour voted yes than SNP voters. Because there was more Labour voters in the country, sort of in relative terms. And when you look at the areas that did vote yes, Glasgow, Dundee, North Lanarkshire, West of Berkshire, these are all traditional, solid, historical Labour areas. So the reason I did share it publicly was to try and explain to others, this is the journey that people who were strongly Labour and still consider themselves in the broadest terms to be Labour, about why they made a journey from probably historically a no voter to yes voter. So yeah, I did share it publicly. That's why I shared it publicly.
I missed that, and that was my bad. That never came up when I was researching you. But
well, you see, I'm not as important as I used to be, so don't think you're finding all these things as easy.
No.
As time goes on, you become a little dot in history. All of us.
Has that caused you any problems, like within? Because you're still a member of the Labour Party, right? Like, is that are people a bit suspicious about that, or a bit annoyed?
I think they are. I mean, there are people that think, oh, you're just some kind of nationalist, and why are you still in the Labour Party? The people that I deal with, because I have to deal with all the political parties on a professional basis. People that so you're really Labour, you know. But like, if people are going to think that, they'll think about it for whatever reason, and the older you get in life, you know, you just care so much less about what people think or what their perceptions are. Not. I hope not to do it in a way that you're arrogant or that it's because you don't care about yourself or don't care about reputation. You just think, well, look, you don't know me, you know. So if you got a problem, come and ask me, and I'll tell you. And if you still don't like saying, that's fine. You're entitled not to like my views. The rest of it. But look, I get my sleeves rolled up every day because that's what I like doing. Get on with my life and get on with my work, and I don't really dwell on whether it bothered people or not. I genuinely hope this, and I've no motivation other than saying I genuinely hope, because I'm not looking for a political career or a newspaper career. And I wrote that article when asked to by the editor of the Sunday Times, because he was very intrigued by why someone with such a strong Labour background and being such a senior position in Labour had, and by the way, others chose not to, but there was many people who had been in similar categories to me. Some chose to be open about it. Some of my former colleagues in the council who had held the Lord Provost position, indeed a former leader as well, that some of them chose to be open about it. But there are many other senior Labour figures privately voted yes as well. And I just thought it was important to tell that story, to try and help people who I thought were more open-minded, taking a unionist position, to at least understand that journey.
I think that's fair enough, because I think my perception is that maybe like the Scottish Labour Party would maybe try to shut down this argument, like as if it was just a one-time thing. A lot of people who have traditionally voted Scottish Labour voted yes, but it was some sort of protest vote, and we're not really wanting that debate to be spun up about whether that should be a position that the party should sort of take.
Well, the Labour Party has decided it's fundamentally a unionist party, and many would argue it always has been. I maybe wrongly think that most of the time I was active in the Labour Party, its position was more nuanced. It was a party at the forefront of Home Rule, and that many people thought that could evolve in different ways. But look, the Labour Party in its current form has decided it's fundamentally and without debate a unionist party, and that's fine, when people are entitled to do that. And I respect and know many people, good friends of mine, who I believe can argue a very intellectually sound and articulate and well felt and convincing argument about the merits of staying in the union. And it's not about some kind of it's for some people just a cultural way of life, and all of these things, important as that can be for all of us in life. But we have a solid economic argument, other things, and we all come to our own conclusions. But you're right to say that's the. But ultimately, even with the resurgence of the Labour Party and the difficulties the SNP are going through after a long period in government and everything else, all polling is telling us that the country is not really changing its position, that it's still split 50-50 on the question, and that there are a lot of people now voting Labour again who still support independence. So ultimately, my view is the Labour Party will eventually have to face up to that. But politics can be a very short-term business, so people, political parties survive over decades and over long periods of time, but the people that hold positions come and go, because that's as it should be, because people should be of their time. So like folk are there now, are thinking about here and now, but I don't think it's a question that will ever go away. Who knows how it will evolve.
I know, I'm keen to see anyway. What about, you've got your own podcast as well now,
Yep.
Stephen, so that's exciting. So Scottish Housing Podcast, like what's the kind of aims and objectives there?
Oh, it was simply because myself and Brian Gilmer that are hosting the podcast is that we couldn't really see any other significant podcasts about housing specifically in Scotland, and we thought there was a wee kind of gap in the the podcast world for it, and obviously I think everybody knows that housing is a really topical debate, and as it happens for both Brian and I, from different perspectives, it's what we do, it's what we're mainly involved in with our work, and we hope that what we're doing is threefold. One has been a bit of an information tool about housing, so we've had some podcasts that talk about the history of housing and how it's evolved in Scotland over the years. We always have a forum for some topical debate about the issues of the debate, and we're trying to pick guests from different backgrounds. And thirdly, what we didn't want it to be, despite my background and despite the fact that housing has become very political, we didn't want it to become another political podcast. We wanted it actually just be about housing. So we have had politicians on the podcast, but we've had lots of other people as well, and that was the thinking behind it. And Brian is a very experienced in podcasts, having been involved in podcasts for football for a long number of years, and indeed manages and founded one of the longest running football podcasts, and not just in the country but in the world. So he's very experienced around podcasts, and he'd been trying to talk me into doing one for a while, and then we eventually thought housing was a good idea, and really the main purpose from an ICE perspective, apart from raising these awareness issues, is it's just something different to do that we're enjoying, and it's not like proper work.
You can just shoot the shit.
Exactly. And I think the great thing about podcasts like this one is it's just conversational as well, and you hope that people just relax. And if I don't know if we really get any listeners, I'm not technical enough to know if we download it or not. We certainly enjoy it, whether anybody else enjoys it, I don't know. But I suppose what I was going to say was people can dip in and dip out. It's the other good thing about podcasts, you can dip into an episode that you might find of interest, or something boring, you can turn it off, you can switch, you can go back to it, But we're just having good fun with it, and it's a whole wee new world to me as well, from this rather mundane parts of my working day can be like anybody else's working day, a bit mundane times. So it's
and would there be any objective, like if you guys can help like shift policy, like because I asked John McKendrick when he was on here, like in terms of house building, there's got to be a number, right, in this country. How many houses do we need to build in terms of for social housing, private housing? Like there has to be a number that somebody has in their mind, but nobody seems to be providing it.
Well, I think people are scared to. Right, so I think politicians are scared too, because politicians get judged, and did you deliver or did you not deliver, and they get, as I said to you, the toughest audience and your enemies are technically your own party. So if you're not performing, there's always somebody in your peer group wants your job, and it can be pretty brutal. And obviously the public and the media and everybody judge politicians, but people in the industry are scared as well, because for lots of reasons, scared maybe is the wrong word, but they're nervous, they don't want to share commercial information with other people, they don't want their company's performance judged on numbers and all these things as well. But look, it is the number one issue. In many ways it's always been the number one issue, and here's why I think it's the number one issue, because see, if you don't have a warm, secure home that you're happy in, that you're content in, that's your little nest, back to what we talked earlier about, we're born here, this is nature, we all need a wee nest, and it's your home base. You go somewhere to go home at night, you're a long day, or we talked about struggling with mental health and these things, where should you feel safest? Where should you feel most content? Whether you live in your own, whether you live with other people, whether you share space with friends, whatever, because we all live in different types of housing arrangements. The most important thing. So we've got a lot of fundamental rights as human beings, that because we choose to organise ourselves in democracies in the West anyway, in what we're in democracy, in a collective, we have fundamental rights, and for me, I think housing is the most important, because it's where we go home to shelter and to sleep, and we should feel safe and content, and everybody should be able to get one as well.
You still no numbers there. That's to come on the podcast, is it? You need to tune in.
I don't know if I'm the man to. Maybe we'll find somebody that can then give us that magic portion. I just think there should just be enough for everybody, and everybody should have some basic things that are right about their house, and that should be safe, sound, secure.
I think that the government themselves there should be a national house building programme, and it should be no link to private building contractors. Like we shouldn't be building houses for profit. It should be just a fundamental human right that we're going to have and maintain a certain level of housing stock in this country, so that, like we talked about earlier, if you are one of those young adults who's having issues at home or whatever, you can apply to the council for a house, and you don't need to wait for 7, 8, 9, 10 years to get a house. You might only need to wait 18 months or 2 years, and you'll find suitable accommodation. Just as a citizen of this country, I would like to see is how we do that. I don't know, but I would like to see somebody in government trying to head us in that right direction.
Well, I'm nominating you. I'm nominating you. What we need in politics is less politicians. We need more people with real life experience, and we need more people, and certainly I think at a local level we need more people that can just have the confidence and the ability to push on the issues that they feel strongly about, and not have to get embroiled in signing up to a whole party's position on everything. We've become less tolerant of, in our party political system, we've definitely become less tolerant of diverse views.
It's came up a few times in this podcast where I've sort of broached the idea that, when the Scottish Parliament first came about, there was more independence. I think that there's going to be, like, the bigger political parties are going to fracture, and I think that it'll spin up like wee sort of side parties and side movements, and then hopefully through that we'll attract a different level of politician, because at the moment, to steal the phrase, there's a lot of career politicians out there, isn't there? They've never done anything else, they've never worked in any other sort of line of work, and I'm not sure having that just insular. There's only so much talent here. I don't think it's going to be. It's been great for the country.
No, it's not sustainable, and it's not real life. And I think when I remember all the excitement when the Parliament was first elected in 1999 and the build up to it, and I think you're right. I think with the fact that we saw a range of opinion represented, smaller political parties and a number of independents was a good thing, and there's no question it was. It brought a richness to the Parliament, and somewhere along the way we've lost a wee bit of that. But I think that a lot of politicians in all parties do understand how significantly broken the country feels, that the system just feels for people, and they know that their existence as career political parties, career politicians is at risk as a result of that. But so is society, because we need whether we like politicians or not, we need an organised society to just keep things within a sensible order. And I don't mean that in a kind of law and order or control and command, but we need an order to how we do things and how we organise things. And you're right, if they can't solve it for us, then things will fracture, and fracture can be a good thing, but it can be a dangerous thing. So I'm nominating you, and look, I've got the perfect name for someone who wants to stand for election to shake up the system in Glasgow. I think you should stand as the candidate for the Jaggy Nettles party.
Right.
And go in there and just jag a few people to think differently. I'm
not sure it's not quite got the monster Raven Looney party vibe to it.
No.
What about, just lastly, I'll make this quick because we've done just over an hour now. Andy Burnham has been up recently, doing a bit of canvassing maybe. So obviously he's the mayor down in Manchester. Steve Rotham's the mayor in Liverpool, and they're talking about they should implement this up here. It seems like you're supporting this. Why are you supporting this, and what difference do you think it will make?
So I've always supported elected mayors, including when I was in the job as leader of the council, and the reason I traditionally did is because when I became leader of the council, I couldn't actually believe how much power I had at my fingertips, and that I wasn't directly elected, and I was only accountable to this small number of councillors who chose me, and they chose me without an election. So I actually thought it was fundamentally wrong for democracy that I could exercise so much power. And whilst there's systems in there that it doesn't allow you to go in and just do any old thing, but it is a very powerful position. But so that's traditionally the reason I've always supported elected mayors, and when both I worked with Labour ministers and then SNP ministers, I argued behind closed doors with all of them they should introduce elected mayors for the big cities or city regions in Scotland, and the reason I think it's topical again, and it's easy to say it's because you look at Andy Burnham and how successful Manchester's become, and it is a good example to hold up, although people underestimate how successful it's also been in Liverpool, and that's a city that you rightly say is probably more in common with Glasgow than Manchester. But the main reason I think it would be a good thing now is because of the point you've just made about about the system being ready to fracture. I think the system is broken, and it needs something different. and maybe elected mayors is part of that, you know, because the Parliament has become a bit stagnant, hasn't it? It's not really representing everybody's views anymore. And maybe this would just be a different way of shaking the system up a wee bit.
And if there is, we go down the mayoral system, whatever the word is, are you going to be a candidate?
No, definitely not. Politics was a past part of my life. It was of its time. And I don't really think that... see, I said earlier about the cities becoming younger. I don't think by the time they bring that in, they need somebody, even if I've not got the white hair yet, but by that time, I would just be another one of these men in their 50s thinking they're still somebody. Nah.
A young man's game, or a young person's game, sorry.
Young person's game, yes, absolutely.
Cut that out. Right, I think we'll call it there, Stephen. I appreciate you coming in.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks again. Cheers, buddy.